Linguistics isn't known for having the easiest terminology in the world. There are dozens of sub-disciplines which often ignore one another, even though they use the same basic terms and draw from the same, often Latin and Greek roots. The result is many similar words for completely distinct concepts, which can cause confusion for those wishing to learn more about the subject. So let's go through just a few pairs of similar words which I often see people mix up. Let's begin with isolate and isolating. These are both words which can be used to describe languages, but while an isolate language may or may not be isolating, these are two distinct words with separate meanings. An isolate language, note that's isolate without a D on the end, is one which is not known to be related to any other language. You may know that Latin developed into the Romance languages, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, Romanian, Catalan, and so on, making these languages related, part of the same family tree. Many languages can be grouped in this way, forming around 140 distinct families worldwide. However, some languages' relationships are more obscure. Perhaps their sisters went extinct before linguists could document them, or perhaps the populations were small and centralised enough that they were simply unable to split into separate groups. This leaves a situation where many languages do not have any clearly identifiable living relatives. It's these which we refer to as isolates. But while isolate refers to a language's genetic affiliations, the very similar sounding isolating instead describes its grammar. Many of the languages you likely know about can change the form of their words to show grammatical information. Even English does this to an extent. We can add an S to words like cat, lorry, or lecture to show that we're talking about more than one of these: cats, lorries, and lectures. But different languages do this to different extents. In English, the ways which we can change words are fairly limited. There aren't many things you can add to make grammatical meaning. Other languages can add a lot more. In Turkish, it's not uncommon to find words with strings of 4 or 5 different elements on a word, each adding little grammatical nuances that in English we might require multiple words to express. These are called agglutinative languages. But what about on the other end of the spectrum? We've seen that English doesn't allow many elements to be added to its words, but it does still allow some. There are actually also languages, such as Vietnamese, Yoruba, and Thai, which allow next to no elements to be added on to any of their words. Each word is just the word alone, and grammar has to be shown using more individual words. These are what we call isolating languages. A language may be an isolating isolate, but there are also many agglutinative isolates, as well as isolating languages in large families. Now let's look at another confusing word pair: perfect and perfective. While our last examples describe different aspects of a language, its genetics and its grammar, these two are both grammatical, and actually describe pretty similar things, making it all the more important to understand the difference between them. Specifically, they both describe verbs and the way these verbs interact with time. When a verb is made to be perfect, it denotes that the action occurred in the past, but in a way that's still relevant to the present. This sounds confusing, but it is actually something we do in English. If you wanted to say that you had eaten, there would be two main ways you could do this. Either you could say, I ate, or I have eaten. At least in British English, since this actually varies in America, the former would be used when the meal had taken place sometime in the past, but presumably long enough ago that it has no bearing on the present. The latter, however, may be used to imply that you had eaten more recently, so were no longer hungry. We can see this most clearly in questions. If you're wondering if someone wants something when you go out to buy food, you may ask, have you eaten? If you were to ask, did you eat? The response would most likely be, when? Because this non-perfect form doesn't carry the implication that not having eaten, you may still be hungry in the present. It detaches the past action from any lasting significance. Perfective sounds similar, but means something very different. When a verb is perfective, it describes the action as if it happened all in one, as a single point event rather than an ongoing process. In English, you can compare the perfective I played with imperfective I was playing. Only in the second sentence is the action viewed as an ongoing thing, rather than a moment. While both could imply any length of play, and may even refer to the same event, only the second can be interrupted. You couldn't say, I played when suddenly you arrived. It sounds a little bit weird, and at the very least implies something else as occurring, compared to the more grammatical, I was playing when you arrived. Again, it is possible to have a perfect perfective, such as I have played, as well as imperfect perfectives and perfect imperfectives. However, there is one additional complication to this story. These terms are in fact so similar that in some languages, the terms perfect and imperfect are used to refer to the perfective and the imperfective. I found this when I was learning Italian at uni. The past perfective is called the perfect in English, or passato prossimo in Italian, while the past imperfective is called the imperfect, or imperfetto in Italian. The next word pair is one you probably won't encounter in mainstream linguistics, as these are in use for conlanging, that is, language creation. These words are quite basic in the field, meaning they trip up a lot of beginners, but are again descriptions for types of languages. The first of these is natural. A natural language is any language which has developed naturally in the real world. In other words, it's any language which is not a conlang. English, French, German, Swahili, Japanese, and Indonesian Sign Language are all examples of natural languages. A naturalistic language, on the other hand, is a type of conlang designed to emulate a natural language as closely as possible. It would be designed as if it were a natural real-world language, by copying the patterns formed by real language evolution, and often actually simulating the evolution itself to some extent, but would still be an artificially created language. Extra confusingly, the conlanging community likes to use a lot of abbreviations, so the full phrase natural language is often shortened to just natlang, but naturalistic language never is. Unlike the previous two pairs, these words are mutually exclusive. There can never be a naturalistic natural language, because these terms are, by definition, of opposing meanings. So if you get them confused, you may well end up talking about the polar opposite of what you thought. And there's our next word as well, polar, though in a different meaning to how I just used it there. In linguistics, describing a question as polar means that it's a question that can only be affirmed or denied. There are many different ways you can categorise questions, but one of the most basic is between content questions and polar questions. Content questions, which may also be called open questions, WH questions, or information questions, seek to obtain a specific type of information, such as place, time, name, or location. In English, we can form these using WH words, such as who, why, what, when, and how. Polar questions, on the other hand, which may also be called yes-no questions, binary questions, or closed questions, only seek to confirm or deny a certain piece of information. In English, these are the questions beginning with a verb, which don't include the WH words. However, there's also a term in linguistics that's quite similar, but describes a distinct, if admittedly related, concept: polarity. The polarity of a word, usually a verb, is whether that word is affirmative or negative. When a verb is affirmed, its proposition is stated to be true. The woman eats fish, the dog explodes, or Adam bought lunch. When it's negated, however, it's stated to be false, which in English we do with the word not or does not. The woman doesn't eat fish, the dog doesn't explode, and Adam didn't buy lunch. Obviously, these two terms are related, as they both deal with affirming or negating a proposition, but I feel they're distinct and separate enough that it's important to learn them anyway. One set of terms that isn't similar, however, is the mess that is a voice. It's probably no surprise that in the science of language we'd want to talk about the voice, as this is what we use to produce most languages. But what is quite surprising is the number of completely distinct meanings the word has in linguistics. The first is probably obvious. The voice is the sound made by a human mouth. As mentioned, we do need to discuss this from time to time in linguistics, where the common meaning of the word is still valid. But there are actually a few other meanings to the word as well. In phonetics, voice refers to whether or not a sound uses vibration of the vocal cords to be pronounced. Many speech sounds are produced with exactly the same mouth shape and airflow, but differ in whether or not the vocal cords, little bits of muscle in the throat, are vibrating or not. You can feel this by touching the front of your neck and producing such pairs like s and z, f and v, or t and d. This quality is known as voicing, with the first of each of these pairs known as voiceless sounds and the latter as voiced sounds. Another use of the word has less to do with sound. This meaning is grammatical and refers to how the arguments of a verb relate to its meaning. The basic arrangement in English is that a verb's subject, which comes before the verb, is the one performing an action to the object which comes after. This is called the active voice. But we also have the option to invert this, turning the previous object, the entity receiving the action, into the new subject, and demoting or even completely deleting the old subject. This is the passive voice, and places emphasis on the new subject, as well as letting us do certain things grammatically, which you can't do to an object. Other languages also have additional voices, which each change the structure of the verb phrase without altering the overall meaning. Now, you'll know that many words have adjectival forms to describe things related to them. Sun and moon have solar and lunar, tree has arboreal, water has aquatic, and so on. The adjective for voice is vocal, hence why the vocal cords produce voicing. But vocal is also the adjective for another linguistic word, vowel. This means that in addition to using it to discuss the already quite confusing meanings of voice, it can also be used to describe vowels. One very common example of this is in words such as intervocalic or postvocalic, which are used to describe the position of another sound relative to vowels. Intervocalic is between vowels, and postvocalic is after a vowel. So in addition to the three meanings of the base word, the derived form of the word also shows more meanings, weaving the web of possible confusion for this word. So, that's all for this video. There are no doubt more confusing words in this subject that I haven't mentioned, so let me know which you struggle with the most. Sorry for the recent lack of videos, but I should be back at it again now. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you for watching.